Michelle, there's a lot to get to. I mean, just hearing the president talk about a couple of days, a few weeks, here we are 6 months later. Is the war any closer to being over?
Yeah, well, it's a tough question to crack in terms of where we are in that timeline, Tim, and in part because we've been asking the same question the entire time from day one, is how long will this take? What does the U.S. see as the timeline for the war, for military operations, and then for negotiations, and now also additionally to get the Strait of Hormuz open, which remains a huge challenge, global challenge right now. So we've been at this for a while, and even after many of those clips that you just put up, our own Jeff Mason was in the Oval Office and questioned Trump about the timeline. And, somewhere around May, June, Trump started to say things like, "Don't rush me, Jeff." And he started to use the leverage of saying, I can wait for as long as it takes. And, while they declared the military campaign over, U.S. officials did then acknowledge that it might be quite a bit longer to sort of wrap up this war and actually extricate U.S. assets from the region. So that's where we're at right now. And the conversation has really changed around what the motivations were, what the strategy was or lack thereof, and what the timeline is going forward.
Michelle, I do remember when he said, "Don't rush me, Jeff." So I remember that comment very clearly. I want to put into perspective where we are now, because today you had Iran's top diplomat. He said resuming diplomacy with the U.S. isn't possible. He also said it depends on the U.S. understanding that pressure doesn't work. So that being said, doesn't seem like something the U.S. is going to consider. I mean, we're squeezing Iran's economy, the blockade in Iranian ports. Where do we stand right now?
Well, Lisa, I would start with the caveat that, we need to talk about what we talk about when we talk about talks. There's many layers of talks here. And at times we've been, at pains to describe what Trump might be referring to if he's saying, oh, we're talking with this or that country, whether it be a mediating country or with Iran, and usually not directly, but through a mediating country, while Iran is also conducting its own talks, including with Oman, about how to manage the Strait of Hormuz or what the plans are there. So there's a lot of, kind of song and dance around what each country, and specifically U.S. and Iran, are posturing toward the talks and what they say is happening or not happening. So that's been one level to unpack. But I think what is clear is that there's no real evidence or sign that direct talks will happen again anytime soon. And Trump and the U.S. administration have expressed a sort of impatience, but then also at times, a blame game on Iran for not coming to the table with something more serious, and actually kind of resisting any attempt to negotiate on things like the Strait of Hormuz, and not to mention the long-term nuclear ambitions, which were at the core of the start of this war.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Strait of Hormuz, so I'm just going to go there. Where do we stand with the opening? There's a few things, like you said, talks and talks and talks. Yet Iran's military said a revenue-sharing agreement has been reached with Oman. Iranian officials said, though, that deal, it wouldn't mean an immediate reopening. And then you had President Trump saying that Hormuz is a very functioning strait. It all seems very back and forth. Where do we stand with the strait right now?
Yeah, well, first I'll say, Lisa, looking back at our coverage from the first day of the war, from February 28th, it was clear, to parts of this newsroom, especially those who cover energy more closely, that Hormuz would be highly impacted and would become, if this thing lasts any longer than the timeline that the U.S. officials were projecting, that it would become a central point and a focal point of this war, and it has. So here we are with, the Strait of Hormuz opening or not opening, and how it might be regulated being a central question about how the region and the world can move on from this war, even if U.S. assets stay. So where we are in that, again, layers of questions. Iran and Oman, as you mentioned, continue to talk, may have settled on some agreements or not around how they would like to manage the strait. But the reality is that Iran remains a threat to U.S. military forces, to U.S. assets in the region, as well as, U.S. partners in the region, most notably, and anyone who's trying to traverse the strait right now. I mean, they've said it and they've acted on it, that they're continuing to harass vessels, and much to, the chagrin of U.S. officials who are projecting otherwise, it does remain a challenge to keep the strait open and to keep safe passage and to convince commercial shippers of every nation that they can escort through safely under the guidance guidance of the U.S. military. So it's still at something of an impasse. And on the diplomatic side, like we said, there's no agreement. Trump is pushing a hard line. He wants the Strait open. He doesn't want anyone to gain a profit, and that, to be noted, is different from what he said at times, months ago about, perhaps the U.S. and Iran can share profits in this. And now the U.S. is pushing, it should be open, it should be free, it should be secure, and the U.S. would likely want to extricate itself from the region, especially from the levels of assets that we currently have there.
Now, all that said, Michelle, is the flow of crude, though, through the Strait, it's been rising, correct?
Yes, I think our energy analysts have been unpacking those numbers day to day and hour by hour, and the claims from U.S. officials have been, from Trump included, as well as Energy Secretary Wright, in the past week or so, have been that, about 15 million barrels of oil have come out. U.S. officials are also saying that they're successfully preventing, Iranian exports from getting out of the region. So, in Trump's view, the U.S. blockade has worked, and it's restarting those energy flows. And our energy analysts too always are at pains to point out, investors are reacting to the fact that there is an increase in those flows, while not anywhere close to the pre-war levels, where the Strait was, hosting traffic of about a fifth of the world's LNG exports. So it's really progress, but not where it used to be. And how do we get to that old level is a big question.
Michelle, we can't ignore the effect of this on the United States, really politically speaking, and that has to do with the midterms and the way that, as we do get closer and closer to November and the midterm elections, the way that Democrats and Republicans are talking about this conflict. Is it the type of thing that Democrats are seizing upon right now in their fight for the midterms?
Well, they certainly are seizing on it to connect it to the affordability issue, which was already an issue before the Iran war, as you know, and separately from the Iran war, even though you can't really extricate it right now, it remains an issue in terms of inflation, housing. I mean, we had the Fed chair today talking about all of these issues, as you noted. The gasoline pump prices are constantly being watched and, of course, being felt by many Americans who are going to cast their vote in November. So, the arguments are being made on each side as to whether or not, Trump can get these prices back down, and if the resolution to this war is anytime soon, and it can have that follow-on impact. But certainly a huge political issue right now, Tim. And one thing I would just say in terms of the longer-term timeline, I mean, everyone, you talk to around town who's an Iran analyst of any type will remind people that the U.S. usually gets this wrong about Iran, that U.S. politics operate on a 4-year timeline, whereas Iran, as a millennial-old civilization with an attitude of resilience and, existentialism, typically looks past that and is not convinced that they need to act on the sort of shorter term that Trump is projecting. So that's been one issue that not just Trump, but past presidents also have had to deal with and grapple with. And it's showing up now as we're approaching the midterm elections. And Iran is not showing to be in the same kind of rush to resolve things.